They were nearly made the Person of the Year last year by Time magazine because this was the upswelling of women everywhere. It was a new movement of women everywhere that never materialized into anything concrete except for an angry march, and was led by deplorables, actual deplorables, like Tamika Mallory and Linda Sarsour. Well, that was an article over at Tablet magazine talking about how deeply rooted the anti-Semitism was in the Women's March. It says, on November 12, 2016, a group of 7 women held a meeting in New York. They had never worked together before. In fact, most of them had never met, but they were brought together by what felt like the shared vision of an emerging mission. There were effectively 2 different cohorts that day. The first one included Brianne Butler, Karen Waltuck, Vanessa Rubel, and Marilyn Folger, a fashion designer turned entrepreneur with a sideline in activist politics who had assumed the nom de guerre Bob Bland. These 4 were new acquaintances who had connected in the days since Donald Trump's election through political networking on social media. Most of them had filtered through the Pantsuit Nation Facebook group, sounds like a party, where a woman in Hawaii named Teresa Shook had days before floated the idea of a female-centered march to protest the incoming administration. Soon after, Rubel, a Washington, D.C. native who founded OK Africa, a digital media platform dedicated to new African music, culture, and politics, reached out to a man she knew named Michael Skolnick. It's very rare to have one person who everyone respects in entertainment or in politics or among the grassroots, said Van Jones in 2015, but to have one person who's respected by all 3, there isn't anyone but Michael Skolnick. When Rubel relayed her concern that the nascent women's movement had to substantively include women of color, Skolnick told her he had just the women for her to meet, Carmen Perez and Tamika Mallory. There are recommendations that Skolnick could vouch for personally. In effect, he was connecting Rubel to the leadership committee of his own nonprofit, a group called the Gathering for Justice. Linda Sarsour, another colleague from the Gathering for Justice Network, was not present for the initial meetings, but soon joined the Women's March as co-chair a short time later. In advance of the meeting, Bland suggested they convene in Chelsea Market, an upscale food court in Manhattan. When the day arrived, the women managed to find each other, but soon realized there was nowhere in the hectic maze-like mall of vendors quiet enough to sit and talk. Eventually, they retreated to the rooftop of a nearby hotel where, less than a week after the idea for the march sprouted, the 7 women got acquainted. According to several sources, it was there, in the first hours of the first meeting of what would become the Women's March, that something happened that was so shameful to many of those who witnessed it, they chose to bury it like a family secret. Almost 2 years would pass before anyone present would speak about it. It was there that, as the women were opening up about their backgrounds and personal investments in creating a resistant movement to Trump, Perez and Mallory allegedly first asserted that Jewish people bore a special collective responsibility as exploiters of black and brown people, and even, according to a close secondhand source, claimed that the Jews were proven to have been the leaders of the American slave trade. To this day, Mallory and Bland deny any such statements were ever uttered, either at the first meeting or at Mallory's apartment. There was a particular conversation about how white women had censored themselves, and also around the dynamics of racial justice and why it was essential that racial justice be a part of the women's right conversation, remembered Bland. But she and Mallory insisted it never had anything to do with the Jews. None of the other women in attendance would speak openly to Tablet about the meeting, but multiple sources with knowledge of what happened confirmed the story. Following an initial 30-minute phone call last week with Women's March co-chairs Tamika Mallory and Bob Bland, Tablet submitted a detailed list of follow-up questions to the group by email and received a written response. Answers from both exchanges are quoted at length in this article. As the fame grew of the Women's March, so did questions about the Women's March origin story, including, at first privately, within the inner circles of the organizations, questions pertaining to the possible anti-Jewish statement made at that very first meeting. And obviously, all of the leaders of the very first meeting, or many of them, shut up about this, but it didn't stop the news from getting out. So anti-Semitism was on the table from day one at the Women's March, and no one cared, because intersectionality does not care about Jews. Intersectionality is just about the intersectional interests of a group of people, so long as that group of people